Hello, welcome to What's Happening in John's Shed. Well, we're here again inside the Valiant engine. Sadly, we've had it running. I've done about 40 miles on it, and we went out a couple of weeks ago, and on my return I took my helmet off and I thought, bloody hell, that sounds terrible. So the engine did sound very mechanical. Almost as if the valve clearances were far too wide, but it was emanating from the top of the engine around, I guess, around this end, which is where the timing gears are, about there, and that's where it sounded to me. Anyway, I've stripped it down. I didn't really want to, but there you are. I've checked all the valve clearances first and they were absolutely bang on. We're back inside again now, and nothing to see really. I got further and further in, all seemed okay, but when I was turning the engine over to remove the pinion with the puller, when I turned the engine with the plugs out, it came to a point where it was clicking, just on the point of putting the pressure on and off the valve gear. And then if I turned it through 180 degrees, it did the same or similar again. Which I thought, well, is it the inner bearing, the outer bearing? Is it the bearings? Is it the cam followers? Cam, you just don't know. So what I did, I pulled the pinion off and inspected it. And I don't know if you can see, if they are in bloody awful condition. They're not quite saw blades, but they're not very good. That face sort of gives you a better idea there. Look, that's, and when you got it on the rock, just before the cam was opening and closing, you could get a rock between the two gears, which was going click, 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 click. If you turned it through about 90 degrees, that tightened up, and then around another 90 degrees, so it click, click, which is exactly obviously where the cam is under load, opening the valve gear, and the gears are under load because obviously the crank is driving the cam gear. So yeah, I've took this off. Look, it'll focus there. Look, you can see those teeth are starting to deteriorate a little, broken through the case hardening on the steel. And there you are. Look, that you can see. If you turn it a little, the gears are nowhere near as bad in some places as in others, because obviously they haven't got quite the loading on them. If you look at that there, okay. So I haven't got another cam or gear, or Valiant one anyway. So what I've done, I've pressed the Valiant gear off an LE. I had the pinion and the gear out of an LE. So what I've done is press the cam out of the LE gear. This is the one off the Valiant now. Changed those, and then I've pressed another gear which I've got, which, as you can see, it was a little bit rusty because it's been in the bottom of my box, but the gears are far better. They're not perfect, but they're intact and they've got a running face. So I've pressed that back into there. I heated the the gear up and pressed it back in. I've stuck it in the lathe, and it's 0.005, which is near enough for me. That's the pinion gear. That's all cleaned up nicely. As you can see, there's just some little marks, rusty marks. They'll perhaps polish off when it's run for a little while. But my problem is to get the cam out. The cam followers are there. You can see the holes for the cam followers that side, and the same for that side. can see that there. Yeah, you can see the pressed in sleeves for the followers. But because the followers are sticking out in contact with the cam, even with the rocker gear backed right off, well, I in fact took the rocker gear out and pulled the push rods out, I couldn't get the followers to come back far enough for it to clear the lobes of the cam. So if you imagine the cam's sat in there, where my fingers are holding it is where the gear would have been. No matter where you turn it, the followers are sitting either behind a lobe or in front of a lobe. So even if you turn it, there is only one place, which is, I think it was where the keyway was virtually vertical. I think that's it there. And that, theoretically, should slide straight out. Well, it didn't. It kept catching on the edge of here. So, just when you think it's going to come out, it just won't come. It clears all the other ones. It comes quite a long way. And then if you turn it through 90 degrees, it's just as bad with this cam follower. So, I jiggled it about and I made the mistake. I should have known better. I got my magnetic probe, stuck it up the pushrod tube, then picked the end of the cam follower up and pulled it back. But the trouble is it's pulled it back too far and it's dropped into the bloody chest, which is, if it had been an LE, it would have been quite easy because you could take the top off the chest, where you would have, on an LE you'd just tap it. On the Valiant they're blanked off still. So just in under there is the cam followers and they fell out on both sides. I should have known better, but you know, you do these things. So unfortunately I'm now in the position, I have got the cam built up with the new spur gear and the gear, which I'm quite happy with. So now I've got to take the heads off to try and retrieve these followers. So that's that. There is an end float on the crank, which I would expect, which I've got to measure. Now, when I've been inspecting the support plate, which sits in here like this, so that's the outer bearing for the crank. As you can probably see, sorry, it should be that way around. As you can probably see, that's how it sits. Two things. One, that thrust face has been rubbing heavily in one place where it should actually, it shouldn't rub heavily in any place, but if it was rubbing, it would be rubbing all the way around. Well, that to me is a pressure point, and I'm damn sure, I'll have to check my video from before, I'm damn sure that wasn't there before. So there, you can see it there now, and it does feel as if it's sitting in this housing unevenly. So I'm going to have to try and rig this up in my lathe and just clock that and see if it's symmetrical or not. Now the other thing, whoever's had this bike before has put a new outer bearing in, and what they've done, they've drilled and put a grub screw there, because I don't think that's standard, to hold or to secure that bush and bearing. Now on the reverse of that, here you can see something's been rubbing. Now from experience, that's usually a sign that the thrust bearing on the crank at the other end of the crank is worn, or it's moved the bush through the housing, which I suspect, unfortunately. And the other thing that usually happens is this little pinhole where my thumbnail is, that is where the oil's fed from that drilling, which is the old spray pipe with the banjo joints. That feeds oil into there, into that thrust face. And usually what happens is when that starts thrusting too hard, it wears and blocks that hole up, and then it all turns to shit because it's got no oil at all. Now that's survived that, but my worry is, why is that? I mean, that crank doesn't, to me, even now without that casing on, that's not excessive. I haven't measured it, but I wouldn't have said that's even 5 thou. And I think it's supposed to be between, the cam is supposed to be between 3 and 5, and I've just got to check my figures, but I think the crank's similar. So yeah, that's something else I'm now going to have to check. So it's getting worse and worse, unfortunately. I'm going to whip the heads off and see if I can retrieve the cam followers and get them back into the place if I can. I've got some head gaskets, put the push rods in, hold everything. Well, before I do that, obviously put the cam back in, and then put all the rocker gear back in to hold them in place again. All very unfortunate, but I should, and in hindsight it's very easy. When I was in here last time, what I should have done really was take this casing off, this support here. I should have taken that off. That's the thrust button, by the way, for the end of the cam. The cam thrusts onto the end of that. There isn't a great deal of end thrust on the cam because the loading's on the sides, and the gear that drives it is a straight cut gear. If it was a helical gear, obviously there would be a thrust. But yeah, so that's the thrust button that you adjust. I believe you put a shim behind that to shim the end float of the camshaft. As far as the crank goes, I'm going to have to get my head around it again as to why that would be thrusting this way so much. I suspect, looking at it, that bush is pushed through that housing. Sorry, this bush has pushed through this housing, because that's dead flush there and it's protruding this side. Now my battery's going to go flat, so I'm going to have to end this video, but that's how we are at the moment. We'll catch up later and I'll show you how we get it on. So please like and subscribe, and we'll continue with the saga. I have got another thing planned to show you, but this is sort of taking priority now because it's taking all my time. So speak to you soon. Please like and subscribe, and we'll get on to it. See you soon. Bye bye.